Good morning, Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We are on page 1465. We finished the paragraph. And let's sum up what we're learning. So relatively speaking, pretty lengthy discussion on the process, the very process and dynamics of how the Nefesh Elokis works with the animal soul, how the divine soul works with the animal soul, which is as direct as it gets in our personal avodah. Basically, direct advice of how we deal with all the challenges, temptations, distractions, all the different words you want to use, seductions of the animal soul in our lives, whether it's distractions as in making a living and being focused too much on the material world, or distractions as in desires and taivas and all kinds of other things that take us off course. So whatever it may be, he's addressing exactly how the Nefesh Elokis engages the Nefesh Habamis, with the obvious goal that the Nefesh Elokis, the divine soul, should persuade, educate, encourage, harness, if you wish, many different words we can use, to direct the divine soul that it too should want and desire and connect to godliness, to transcendence, not just to its own survival and its own needs and its own existence. That's in a nutshell what we are learning here. And the technical language being used here is that we're talking about Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, as he began continuing the discussion back from page 1350, and now we're started at 1463. We said to go back to Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, that the soul of a human being is compared to a candle, the candle of God. Why? Because like a candle, which consists of a wick and the fuel, the oil, and the light that it produces, so too the divine soul manifests like a wick within the body and the animal soul, which is the shemen, the potential fuel that can either be used the wrong way or for its own needs, like we learned about shemen. It's neutral shemen. It's not kedusha yet. Or the shemen, the oil, can become fuel that feeds and is directed to become part of the fire, the light, which is the light, the divine light and the divine love that the divine soul is drawing, influencing the animal soul, and therefore drawing that oil into it. We'll learn more about that specific example with the oil, but right now, he's been talking about the difference between the divine soul and the animal soul is diametric opposites, both meichin and mides. Intellectually, the divine soul is only engaged and only interested in divine matters and nothing else. The seichel nefesh habamis, on the other hand, is rak b'tzarchei atzmi. It's only in its own needs, hachumrim, material and crass materialistic needs, but you can say its own materialistic needs, and its understanding of things is only in the yeshus, understanding existence, not understanding its source or its purpose or where it comes from. And even more so with the midas. The midas of the Nefesh Elokis are drawn to love and to revere and to be inspired by and to glorify and to acknowledge God. The midas of the Nefesh Habamis, its emotions about taking care again of its own needs, its own materialistic needs. Ruach ha'adam eil lamayla, the spirit of the man rises above towards transcendent, toward higher states of consciousness and emotional experiences. And ruach ha'behema yiredes lamata, and the spirit or the breath of the animal it turns downwards. It's focused on its own survival, its own existence down on earth. And nevertheless, they both come together. And this is from the wonders of God that he brings together such two opposites. They join together, they unite together like one personality. It's not like two sets of faculties. It's like one set of everything comes together, even though they're driven by two different sources and come from very different places. It's like a partnership between two opposites. Miniflois Hashem, that he accomplishes this. And it goes both ways. That every koyach Well, before we speak about both ways, and every faculty of the divine soul manifests, and it goes both directions. That every seichel of the divine soul is also a seichel of the animal soul, because you can't be thinking about two things at once. So even though the faculties are not the actual thinking process, but the bottom line is the mind of the divine soul, when you begin to engage with it, it's also engaging the animal soul. It's not like the animal soul gets shut off. And that's indeed why the divine soul's comprehension on earth is not the same as it is in heaven, when it's not bound by an animal soul or a body and an animal soul. And yet it still can understand profound ideas, the divine soul here inside of a body, and everything comes b'seichel hativi. In other words, it's not like when you start learning Torah or thinking about or using your mind to understand godliness, the animal soul is shut off as if it doesn't exist. No, it's using the animal soul's very mind as well to understand this idea in Chassidus or Lakuz that you're learning. And indeed, and become mishalim and examples and similarities from physical things and material things that help understand these ideas. So yes, it does somewhat conceal the ideas. He says, etzem ha'er, because if the divine soul was on its own, unfettered, it would be a completely different type of understanding. But nevertheless, what's happening here is the Nefesh Elokis is understanding the divine through the garments and the tools of the animals of the natural soul, and to the point that he can strip it from that, and then he will have the etzem ha'er. In other words, it's a process that you can derive and draw out the divine, even the etzem ha'er in it. And the same thing with the midas. Even though the midas, the emotions of the divine soul and animal soul are very different, diametric opposites, like we said. One is desires godliness, and the other desires materialism. But the way the divine soul desires godliness is also based on the wiring of its very nature, the nature of the animal soul. So a person, for example, who's wired, who has a natural inclination toward chesed, so his Avodas Hashem is also in a level of chesed. And then, therefore, so that's the way it works one way, that the divine soul is constantly engaging with animal soul, and therefore it also works the other way around. Because the divine soul manifests in the animal soul, so therefore when the divine soul is understanding and comprehending and contemplating on godliness, it also affects the animal soul. Just like the animal soul affects the divine soul's intelligence affects the animal soul, that it too should understand the divine, not just that the divine soul itself understands it, but also it's making an effort that the animal soul should also understand godliness. And when the natural intelligence understands, it also then allows for the midas, the divine emotions that are drawn to God, to love and revere God of the divine soul, also affect that love, that fiery love, passionate love, also tislav gam b'nefesh habam is ba'ava. It also ignites and brings alive the fire that also the animal soul should also love it with a measure of passion. And with that, he concluded that paragraph on page 1465. I sum up now what we learned in the last class. Now, I just want to point out something that is relevant here and also is going to be even more relevant as we go on. So remember, I mentioned the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which is an explanation of the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, Amiyah Kashem Elokeinu Hamagbi, that the Rebbe Rashab cited back in page 1352. So I want to point out one of the first connections that where I see where the Mittler Rebbe really adds much to help us understand the entire flow. So I'm going to just point out something, and then we're going to continue learning. And this point is going to be brought out a lot more a little later. But I think it's a good time to bring it out. And I'm interesting that none of you pointed it out in your questions. It's not a complaint, just saying it as an observation. Earlier we learned, and I refer you back specifically The bottom of page 4, actually it goes back even further. We were learning that even though the neshama is rooted higher than the malachim, the angels, and even higher than Torah, and higher than all the levels, all the way up to the etzem, helam ha'atzmi, or the etzem itself. Nevertheless, once the neshama comes down below, it dresses up in the garments of each world as it goes downward, to the point that its core root gets concealed. And that's why the neshama needs support. Siyua was the word. Just like the eye, even though the eye in its core root can see without any support, it just has the power of vision, the etzem koyach hariyah and the nefesh, for example. But once the vision, once the power of vision comes into the physical eye, now, even though it has the power to see, it needs light in the dark to be able to see. You can't see from one end of the world to the other, as we learned much earlier. So it needs a siyua. What is that in Aveda? The neshama, as it comes down below, though at its core, it's always connected, but it's not revealed. So it needs the siyua to help. As I've been pointing out, this siyua comes all the way from Torah Eir. That's the whole beginning of 1350, which we're going to discuss at length, that Torah illuminates. That's what Torah does. We were given the gift of Torah in this world to illuminate the dark paths. Why can't the neshama figure it out on its own? Because the neshama is concealed. Shcheirani is darkened. It needs that support. It is true that down below, and we'll soon talk about that more, the nefesh habamis and the animal and the animal soul and the body and all that creates a tremendous thirst. But still, the soul still needs direction. Thirst alone is not enough, as we'll discuss momentarily. So that's why we need the Torah. And we need the Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the community, the Sanhedrin, leaders, teachers, educators. And we need the Malachim, who are also called Einayim. They're God's supervisors. They help process. Remember the digestive system, the gut, they help process. So they too support, which is why before Shema, we say Yetzer Ma'eris, which talks about the Malachim. Because when we contemplate on the bittul of the Malachim, it inspires us. It inspires the neshama below. Then the neshama gets ignited. Once it's ignited, it actually can reach places much higher than Malachim, and actually even bring the Malachim to higher states, as we learned. But the Malachim play that role. They're like the king's advisors or the king's ambassadors in the palace. The neshama is out there in the dark part of the world. So when it sees these agents of God, the Malachim, and it contemplates on them, that's the Birchas Yetzer. It brings us to Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, V'ahavta. So the neshamas can do what they. So if you go back to page, at the bottom of page 1443, he said, Yesh lahavin, since Krishma, the neshamas Yisrael reach l'sachid begufah de malka, l'shtaba begufah de malka, like we learned, they become united with the very guf of the king of the etzem. Mamish, lo mitzrichim Yisrael lekabel ava v'yirim malachim. Why do they need to receive love and reverence from the malachim? B'kedushas Yetzer shalifnei Krishma. Malachim are much lower than the neshamas. So on page 1444, he answered, Acha inyanhu, because the neshamas, like I just explained, are malubashim begufim, gashmim. Shesharsham nimshach min nega. Remember the word nega, klipas nega. So the bodies come from nega, tasiyah, which we see from the Merkava of Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Nesher. And he went on to explain, therefore, when we invoke the Malachim, what we're doing is we're invoking the very root and source of Nega, because the Nega below is rooted in Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Nesher, which is the level of the Malachim. So that helps, so to speak, soften up to help tame the animal soul. That's the role of the Malachim. But then he said there's another role that they play. That's one thing. Since the animal soul is blocking and trying to impede the divine soul from experiencing love and reverence of God, or love of God. So that's why so by talking about thinking about the angels and speaking about them, in a way you're like invoking the source of the animal soul itself, which in a way causes the animal soul to pay attention, as we explained then. I'm reading from the middle of page 1444 to say these blessings about Kedushas HaMalachim. That shakes them up, an internal shake-up. It's like a chiseling. In a way, you're helping weaken, so to speak, its animalistic desires to allow it to receive and hear what the divine soul has to say. Now then, afterwards, when you come to Krishma and you've somewhat so-called softened the animal soul, then you can come to Nefesh Elokis, and Shema can connect itself straight with the divine itself, which is the source of its source. And the second thing he said, the Gamba Aveda the Nefesh Elokis, the Malachim help. A second thing they help, Misayein HaMalachim, because they're like the digestive system. They're the gut. They're the Hamu Me'ailoi. That means as the neshama comes down below, the malachim also help the divine soul process and internalize and integrate the divine. Just like the digestive system, the gut internalizes the nutrients when we eat a meal. And that's the second reason the Birchas Yates. Okay. Then he went on to talk about Golus and so on. Why am I emphasizing this? Because the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, based on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer that we're talking about so much in the last few days, that's what the connection he makes. He asks that question in the middle. He says, but there's in the context of the Ner. He says, how is it really possible for the divine soul to affect the animal soul? We've learned now that it affects it. So he answers, that's the role of the Malachim. The Rebbe Rashab reversed the order. Before he got to Ner Hashem Nishmasadim, he gave the whole Arichas, much a lengthy discussion, elaboration of how the Neshamas need the support of the Malachim. But at the end of the day, it all comes now together, because you can ask the question, we just learning here right now. That's why I'm bringing it into the picture. We're learning at length how the divine soul affects the animal soul to the point that it gets it to understand and appreciate godliness. And furthermore, to actually feel godliness emotionally. But then the question is, one second, that doesn't come so easily. It's very nice to say that, but the fact is it doesn't come easily. So this is where we need to go back to what he learned earlier. This is coming after the fact that the animal soul has already been weakened due to the Birchas Yates. The Malachim have already done their job. So if you remember as well, the discussion there was, who does this? Who weakens who ultimately influences the animal soul? Is it the Malachim or is it the Neshama? And the answer is both. It's really the Neshama. I should correct myself. He says there clearly, it's the eye itself that sees. The light in the dark room that allows the eye to see does not cause the eye to see. It gives you the tools that now there's light shining so you can see. But if you remember, he made it very clear that it's the Neshama itself that experiences this power. Because it's not that the Neshama need the angels fundamentally to illuminate the animal soul. They need the angels for support, because the animal soul is formidable and the Neshama has become concealed as it came down below. So at the end of the day, the Giluyim of the Malachim, and we'll learn also about the Torah and so on, they help achieve this. But at the end of the day, it's the Neshamas itself that ultimately do it. So now when we're talking how the Nefesh Elokis itself is influencing the animal soul. But let's not forget, it does come with the support of other factors involved. So basically, the Neshama is empowered with a whole arsenal. It has its own powers. It also has the power of the Malachim and other strengths that allow it to do its job. And it's really just a whole, like a whole tool chest, an arsenal that allows the Neshama to achieve this mission, which is the ultimate purpose of all of creation. I just wanted to bring it in here, that we shouldn't forget that it still has that support, even though we're speaking right now about the Neshama itself achieving this. Now, this is going to be very relevant, because remember, we spoke about Ner Hashem Yishmas Adam. So then why do we need Ner Mitzvah V'Torah? The second verse. Remember, the whole piece began on page 1350 that the Torah and then Ner Mitzvah V'Torah. Not just so. If the neshama is already a psila and a divine power, and we're learning here that the neshama has the power to affect the shemen, the animal soul, that it too should fuel divine comprehension and divine emotions. So why do you need Torah and mitzvahs? Why do we need Ner Mitzvah V'Torah? And that's where the Maimer from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer come into play. That, as I said, I don't know how much the Rebbe Rashab himself is going to spell out before we get to the end of Ayin Beis, but it's critical to just bring it into the picture. That's why. And the answer is going to be because mitzvahs and Torah, that's their role, is to help the neshama achieve this. Because the neshama alone is in a concealed world. So it's true the neshama has tremendous power, but the more support it can get. And Torah mitzvahs, in addition to tefillah, in addition to the malachim, that all these are tools that help the neshama itself to see. Remember, it's the eye that sees. The neshama itself will see. And Mashiach comes, the Gula comes, the neshama itself will see. But there are many other factors and divine tools that we're given that help us in this process. So all that, I just wanted to put a little context to all of this to help us understand what we read as we go on further. Okay. So I'm ready to continue unless anyone has any questions from middle of the new paragraph on page 1465.
Yes. Practically speaking, the help of the Malachim, I mean, I cannot clearly see how Torah and mitzvahs can be used as a vehicle for the Nefesh Elokis to wake up and impact the Nefesh of Bahamas, the oil, the shemen. But how do we really, besides just saying the couple blessings in the morning or whenever we are at tefillas about malachim, how do we really harness them, and how do we actually utilize them in a practical level in our day-to-day life? These malachim that are spiritual entities that most people don't even realize. I mean, we can learn Tanya with people, and they can grasp that. When I can tell, how do I go up to myself or to another person? Oh, there's malachim that help you, and this is how you say a couple blessings, and that does it. Besides that, how do we utilize them in this effect, to have this effect on the Nefesh of Bahamas?
You learn Ayin Beis starting from page. Let's see here. Starting from page 1408. Which is approximately a good 50 pages. And he teaches us for the first time, for many people, it'll be the first time, what Malachim's role is. I agree with you. In yeshiva and in most shiurim chassidus, you don't really hear much about Malachim. I mean, you hear them here and there. But I know chassidim that would spend 2-3 hours just on that, what you call just that blessing you say before Shema. Because they learned chassidus. And they understand the malachim that were sent to Avram Avinu, and the malachim sent to Yitzchak and to Yaakov, and the malachim sent to Moshe, and the malachim sent to the Klal Yisrael. He brought all this into the picture. If you remember, he brought many verses. He explained the malach Hashem sends after the Chet Egel to help the Eden. Malachim are far more complex and far more necessary than you may think. Just because you or others may not be aware of it, so that's why we need chassidus. And when you start understanding their role, so I would basically tell you to go back and just read these pages. There's nothing better than that. The Rebbe Rashab said it all himself. He answered your direct question here. I'm just elaborating on it and explaining it, that they play a tremendous role. I'm sure you say every Friday night, Shalom Aleichem, Malachi Hasharis, right? Malachi Hashalom. Most people don't think about it too much. Malachim, yeah, they escorted us, very nice, and then we send them goodbye. But we say it every Friday night. Malachim are far more present in Torah and in mitzvahs than you may think. You start looking in the tefillas and the different brachas we make and so on. You see them. Talk about Aliyah coming to every bris. You talk about the malachim, the Aliyah coming to the seder. It's not it's not like the center of all of existence. Obviously, Torah and mitzvahs is the way we implement godliness in this world, but the malachim played a role, and you see it in written Torah and Torah Shabbat Peh, and definitely in Zohar and Kabbalah and Chassidus. So I would just suggest going back to page 1408 where he starts this topic and going through it all, and you'll see the tremendous insights. I mean, he gave a whole process. It's like asking a question, what do we need a digestive system for? We just eat food and let it be absorbed in the blood. And no, we need a whole digestive system. God forbid it's not working properly. We will not live. We will not survive. So the Malachim play equivalent role in Ruchnius, and the Elam is Bria, Yitzir, Asiyah. They have a very critical role to play. The more you understand their role, and the more you understand their role in our context, that's part of what Birchus Yetzer is about. Every day in Kedusha, what do we say? Kodesh, Kodesh, Kodesh. Ve'isrofim, ve'efanim, ve'chayes HaKodesh. Again, many people say it as lip service, but when you understand the words and you really understand the kavanah, you say, "What's saying? Why is Malachim being invoked here in davening? Why don't I just speak to God? What do I need these Malachim for?" So all that is answered in these pages. I've summed it up many times. I don't know, but I would just refer you back to read them, read it slowly, and I think you'll find fascinating insights and understanding. And also, you have to get rid of the so-called. We have to all get rid of the nursery school myth of angels. They're not little elves flying around with wings. Angels are spiritual entities. We talk about them like they're human, but they're not human. They are spiritual entities that have a shlichus. And this Chassidus talk difference between malachim and spheres and levushim and patzuf. Everything has its role. So malachim are active agents of the divine that fulfill each one their particular mission. Talk about malach Michal, malach Gavriel. As I said, there's a lot about it. And actually, this is Ayin Beis is one of the few places that you really find a very elaborate understanding of what their role is. That's my response. Okay. You also look in Tanya, where he talks about how the Malachim carry, he spoke about it here too, how they're like the wings, that they carry our tefillas, and they help support and bring it up to the right place. When we say Shira below, the Malachim respond. So there's a whole role that they play. Yeah. Okay. Good. Any other questions? We're ready to continue. So middle of page 1465, we'll start the new paragraph. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. The kach who say that the derech haveda bebir v'tikun the nefesh habamis, and so it goes, and so it is the seder, the order, and the process, and the method of the aveda of birur v'tikun the nefesh habamis, the birur, the separation, the clarification, the refinement, and repair, and if you can say beautification as well. Tikkun is not just repair as in broken, but tikkun means improving it to the point of fulfilling what it was meant to be fulfilled. But eifun kazeh dafka is dafka in this eifun that we've been discussing here. Shaseichel the nefesh habam is yovin v'yasig elikus. That the seichel, the intelligence of the animal soul, should understand and comprehend godliness. If you remember in the previous paragraph, he said that the way the Aved of Nefesh is to refine the animal soul is the tikkun of first and b'chinas haseichel. It's just like when you're dealing with someone who's, let's say, behaving in a way that's reckless or inappropriate. So the first thing you want to do is you want to communicate with them. You can't just go and tell them, stop doing what you're doing. You want to impress upon them and educate them. That's the best way to deal with something. Like the Alter Rebbe says, there's two ways to deal with a ganaf, a thief. One is you put him in prison, and that way he can't hurt anyone. Second way is to rehabilitate him. You educate him. They shouldn't want to steal. They should understand the value of being an honest person and understand the damage of being a thief. So he himself, so that way, once he's in prison, you have not changed anything. You're just keeping him at bay. You're controlling him. But if you rehabilitate him, you've convinced him and you've changed his whole being. So really, excuse me, it's an educational process. And that, as we have learned and will learn, is ultimately going to also affect the emotions. That's how it works. It's a big part of Chassidus, is we don't just rely on people's reflexes and instincts and conscience. We learn Torah, we learn Chassidus. We come to understand what is Chodesh El, what is Tishrei. The more you understand it, the more you appreciate it, the more you say, that's something I want to be part of. So it's the seichel that leads to the midas, essentially. But he says it in very strong words, and I think it's important to just read it again. This is the seder v'derech haveda v'bira v'tikkun nefesh habamis. This is the seder. In what manner? That you want to impress on the seichel of the nefesh habamis. Not to impose, not to force, but to impress it, to inspire it, and motivate it to understand and comprehend godliness. V'oz dafke. And dafke then, specifically in that manner that we just described, then the emotions and the feelings of the divine soul will also affect the nefesh habamis, will also be inspired and excited by it. Ba'avel elikus, in a love to godliness. So it's like, you see, I mentioned before an Ovid davening properly. You see a person davening hours and hours, Shabbos, Yom Tov, sometimes in the weekdays. If you don't understand at all, what is he thinking about? Say, what is he doing under a talus for 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever the amount of time? But when you start learning Chassidus, you start appreciating what godliness is, what transcendence is, what these higher states are. And that then you realize this person is not thinking about what meal he's going to eat next, how much money he's going to make, about covet, vanity, power, influence, glory, and so on. He's thinking about the reality of all of existence, as we've learned at length. Now, what is true reality? What is the true source of life? What's Chaim Amitim? What's real? What's truth? And then you realize, once you understand that, then you say, look, wow, see a person sitting and davening, your midas of the nefesh habamis could also begin to melt a bit and affected by it. Can it happen without understanding? Of course it could. Like anything, you can listen to a song and be very much in touch, but if you really want it to be a really sederist that really affects someone, so the more the nefesh habamis learns about Elikus, the more it will be infected, like he says, is that when the midas of nefesh Elikis are awakened, the nefesh habamis is not foreign to them. It understands now what the nefesh Elikis is saying. Initially we begin that there's a battle between the two. The nefesh habamis wants materialism. It wants to survive, wants to exist. It wants to satisfy its own pleasures and needs, desires. The divine soul wants godliness. There's no common sprach. There's no common language between them. But the process, the derech seder v'derech haveda, is that there should become a language, which is essentially really much of why we learn Chassidus, we learn about Elikus. We want the nefesh habamis to be listening in and understand part of it. How much enters, that depends, of course, on each person and how much we allow. But the more geschmack we have, someone asked me the other day, I'm asked a lot of times, how do you keep up with learning Ayin Beis already 10, 11, 12 years, every day, and so on? So I said, you have to remember, my nefesh habamis enjoys it. And when your nefesh habamis enjoys something, you usually stick to it. So I think that's a very, it sounds a little like almost, I know you think it's a nefesh Elikis thing for sure, but nefesh habamis enjoys learning Chassidus and understanding. It's only going to serve your interests because the nefesh habamis definitely enjoys other things. So the more it could enjoy Chassidus, the more of a fighting chance you have. So I'm just putting it in more as balabatish words, what he's saying here. However, if the seichel hativi did not understand, if the animal soul was left out of the picture, or was over its head and did not understand, it says seichel hativi now. I mentioned a number of times that it's interchangeable. Sometimes it says seichel nefesh habamis. Sometimes he says seichel hativi. Seichel hativi is not as animalistic. It's not so much about me, but it's still about the natural world. It's still human intelligence. We talked about the difference in human intelligence as intelligence on figuring out my pleasure. There's human intelligence like science and mathematics, not so much about your pleasure necessarily, but it's still about the material world. You're trying to understand the yesh, not the ayin. So he changes. That's just to point out why he uses the different words different times. He wants to show that obviously seichel hativi leads to seichel nefesh habamis. So lo yasoga. So if he did not have this asoga, sheyevin asa'inyan, that this natural mind, human intelligence, would not understand the idea. Gam im aseichel nefesh elkis mevin umasig. So then, if the nefesh habamis, if the nefesh hativi is left, the seichel hativi is left out of it, then even if the seichel, the intelligence of the divine soul, does understand and comprehend, and concentrates and contemplates on it well, the gam is spol ba'ava, and more than that, it also gets excited with love, even though that may be the case. But if the natural human intelligence was not engaged, did not understand it, lo yiful ma'uma ba nefesh habamis. It won't have any effect on the animal soul. She'ein nizuz b'mkemeh. It won't be moved from its place. It'll remain unfazed, unmoved. Because like two different, it's like almost two different worlds. The divine soul is busy. It's like your Yetzer Hara is saying, okay, now you want to go daven. I'll wait for you. As soon as you finish davening, I'll start doing my work. So basically, he's saying here is that it has no effect at all. Now, can you say no effect at all? Obviously, it can have a makabdika effect, but he means here a serious effect, something that really impacts it. It would be the equivalent, like just like you. I remember someone telling me. I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, one of the things that changed their lives. A person, father was very. It was a person when he was a younger child. His father was a very big Baal Tzedakah. Gave a lot of zakah, and but what really impressed him was that every time he gave zakah, he brought the child along. He brought the child along so the child should see by example. And he says, "I remember the last time I saw my father. His father then unfortunately died in a tragic event, tragic accident. He said, last time I saw my father was when he gave somebody some zakah in a very discreet and respectful way. He says, so it planted in my mind a seed that I always knew about giving. But imagine, let's just take an example that the father would say, will you wait in the car or you wait at home? I'm going to do something. So he'd still do the mitzvah, but it wouldn't have an impact. So the point he's making here is that if the seichel of the TV is left outside of the picture and doesn't understand, that's not going to have any impact on it. It'll be like a split personality, that the divine soul is doing its thing and the animal soul is doing its thing, or is left out of the picture. So that's what he's saying here. So la yiful ma'uma. The Yachaliyas, he qualifies. It's possible, Rag b'derech chlishus. It's possible it will have effect, but it only will weaken. Shenechlash keiche kifi gilu ha'er denefesh mipnei gilu ha'er denefesh shalakis. Animal soul could be weakened by somewhat tamed or subdued. Maybe is a better word, but not fundamentally changed or impacted. Because it did not engage and was not understood by the natural human intelligence. He's going to speak more about this, but let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything.
Rabbi Jacobson, is it fair to say that basically the animal soul is what makes it possible for internalization, to get it with the epinemius of an idea? Because other than that, we wouldn't be able to. Otherwise, it'll be like a more of a Makif effect, as you just said. That'll be it's a great idea. Let's say you go to a shiur, it's amazing, but it never gets internalized. I think, is it fair to say that the Nefesh HaBamid makes it possible for us to be able to internalize it in a very real way?
It's possible to say, but that's not what he's saying right here. So as always, I would focus what we're learning right now, and we'll probably talk more about that soon, but that's not what he's discussing yet.
I have a quick question just about verbiage. I think one time it slipped out of you in that explanation of this beginning of this paragraph. You said nefesh hativi, and I don't know if that was if you misspoke or if you intended, because it seems like the Mittler Rebbe uses that phrase nefesh hativi, and it's the first time I've seen it. I'm reading the Mimer, the Mittler Rebbe, and I don't remember seeing it anywhere else. Is that just another reference to nefesh behema or the nefesh chochmas, the chochmas nefesh behema?
Were you here in the class a few days ago when I spoke about the different names? I spoke about seichel.
Yeah, I do. I don't remember. I don't remember
about,
using the nefesh TV.
No, one second. So I think
Yes.
I called. Let me tell you what I believe I said. I spoke about there's nefesh habamis. We all know there's nefesh hasichlis, there's nefesh hativis, nefesh hachiyunis. I believe I used all those. Maybe I didn't mention nefesh hativis, possible. But bottom line is there are different names for what we would call not the divine soul, and it's just a matter of level. Nefesh habamis, I explained. Were you at that class?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. Okay. So nefesh hativis and nefesh hachiyunis is very synonymous. Maybe there's little differences, but it's basically different elements. He's talking about the biological soul. You could talk about the life, the soul that gives life, like nefesh. Nefesh habamis is most bamizdik, but nefesh hachiyunis, nefesh hativis, these are terms that are interchangeable often.
Okay.
He does use here
Thank
sometimes. You. What I was focusing on, there's seichel hativi, and there's seichel hanefesh habamis. There's also seichel hachiyunis. Sometimes seichel nefesh hasichlis. So that's in this context, it really doesn't change much, except the fact that, as I said, TV. He did explain on page 1464 the difference between, let's say, the seichel when it's focusing on your pleasure, and the seichel focusing on the yesh. So they both come from, they're both not nefesh l'kis. And that would be one distinction among many others. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
The additional three souls besides Elikus or Bahamas, Nefesh Elikus and Nefesh Bahamas, where do they originate from? Or are they all part of Nefesh Bahamas? These other three souls.
Who spoke about three souls? Which three souls are you referring to?
This Nefesh Sichlis, Halui, and then I can't pronounce the other one.
Generally speaking, in Tanya, he says there are two souls. Nefesh Habamis, Nefesh Halakis. There's my morim from the Alter Rebbe himself, and some Tzedek and others that talk about a third, Nefesh HaSichlis. And there they explain, Nefesh HaSichlis is usually part of Nefesh Habamis. When you break it down, it's more like the Seichel part. Nefesh Habamis is the full, the Seichel and the Midas. Something like the difference between Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov is the Midas. Yetzer Hara is the Midas of the Nefesh Habamis. Nefesh HaSichlis is like the Seichel of the Nefesh Habamis. So it's really generally two souls. We don't talk about really three. Sometimes it talks about a third because you break down the Nefesh Habamis into two. It's a longer discussion. It's not really for here. Whether it actually is three or is it two. We do know there are 5 levels in the soul, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. And how does that work into this? But it's really out of the scope of what we're learning in Ayin Beis now. It's interesting stuff. I'm not denying that. But I would leave that not for here because it's just another topic. And again, you can look it up in the indexes and Sefer Likutim and other places where this is addressed.
Thank you, Rabbi.
What's going through someone's mind when they're davening for 3 hours? I can't even imagine. I'm trying to think of it, and I can't. I mean, are they trying to wipe out any thoughts and just? I'm
a little surprised. Maybe they're just reviewing what they learned in Ayin Beis. That can take 3 hours.
So that could be part of Shemona Esrei, up to 3 hours. I mean, what are they doing? I don't understand.
You take Shema Yisrael, HaMayrich Be'echad. We spoke of what means Mayrich, to elaborate on Echad, one word. You can't see somebody thinking 3 hours about the word Echad?
I can't, well, I can't because if I take a few
No,
seconds.
no.
That's a lot.
Hold on. I understand you can't do it, but you can't imagine somebody being able to focus for 3 hours on the word Echad and going through the bittul of the elements from the lowest levels to next level to all the way to Atzmos.
So okay, so they're actually. I'm going to think this. I'm going to think that. And while I'm saying,
They're not learning. It's remember, davening is not learning. They're
so
living
that's
it.
what
They're living it. They're living these experiences. I'd say I'm a little confused. I can understand that you could say you're not there yet, or I'm not there. But isn't that the whole Ayin Beis, is to teach us to experience godliness in a way that, I mean, what do people do for 3 hours? How could they spend 3 hours on a sailboat and look at some fish and drink some wine? That you do understand?
I can understand the wine part.
Okay. Some people, the wine is the wine of godliness, the wine of Atzilus, the wine of these worlds, and that's what they live with. They're experiencing it. Davening is experiencing lakus, not just learning it, experiencing it. So you know the story. You remind me the chaver of the Magid, the Zricha Magid. They learned together when they were young. They learned Kabbalah and all the kavanas, tefillah, and davening. Anyway, one day he comes and he sees that after everyone finished davening, the Magid, Mizricha Magid, is still sitting under his talis davening more half hour, an hour, hours. Finally, he finishes. He goes over to the Magid and says, Magid, Shalom Aleichem, remember me? Yeah, of course, we were chaverim. He says, I have to understand something. The minyan finished a few hours ago, and everybody went home. I davened. I learned with you how to daven. How is it that you daven for 3-4 hours? Most of us daven an hour max. Magid asked him what he does for a living. So he says he goes several times a year to Leipzig, to the marketplace, buys a lot of material, comes back, and his wife and family, they sell it to the local merchants. Okay. The Magid says, how long does it take you to travel there? He says, well, it's weeks. So first I have to travel, then I have to settle in, and then I have to do the selling and the buying and so on. So why bother traveling all the way? Stay home, close your eyes, and contemplate how you travel to Leipzig, how you stay in an inn, and how you buy material, and then you come back and so on. You don't have to bother this whole travel. It'll take you just a few minutes to contemplate on it. So he said, Magid, please, you're a batlin. A batlin means someone who is not down to earth. He says, because I need the scheda, I need the material. It's not going to help me sitting in my house contemplating on material. I need to buy the material. So the Magid said, well, that's exactly what real davening is. It's about I need the scheda. And to get the scheda doesn't take a half hour or an hour. It takes hours. You have to travel there. You have to travel with your mind, with your heart, with your soul, with your emotions. I remember the Rebbe told the story a few times. Very powerful. So that's my answer.
Is it questionable still whether it ever spent a long time davening or even whether he davened with us? Does anybody
Listen, I can't speak for the Rebbe. I don't know what he was doing. I'm sure he knew how to travel quite well to these places. And he did it his way. I don't know. I don't know what he did in his room. I don't know what he did by davening. All we knew is what we saw. Who knows? I'm convinced that the Rebbe knew how to travel. And I mean, did the Rebbe daven for hours? Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Not in public, no. In public, he usually davened with the minyan. But we also know there are times, every Yom Kippur, other times, that we know the Rebbe did not. He just went through the motions, but he didn't daven. He davened in his room. We know that. But out of respect for the call, for the community, for the Elam, he made a few steps, but he didn't. Like, for example, there was a time we saw that he didn't daven Shemoneh Esrei Mincha Erev Yom Kippur, and later we heard that the Rebbe davened in his room much longer. But that's, everybody has their way. The davening is a very personal thing, so I can't speak for others. I speak for myself.
Anyway, I'm sure that Rebbe got to Leipzig much faster than we can get.
But if the Maggid took hours, why would you say the Rebbe didn't take hours?
Maybe you could say that he had Kvisa Sederach.
I don't know if they wanted Kvitza Saderach. When you want this experience, you savor it. Why would you want to do it shortcuts? It's not like, what else do you have in your life? These people, this was their life, to connect to God. It's like the other way around. They can't wait to daven. The rest of the things they do is they want to do quickly. The material things, get it over with.
It's beyond time anyway. When you're beyond time, it doesn't matter.
Anyway, I think the focus should be on ourselves. I don't know. I can't speak for them. I don't know if it's unless it inspires you.
Definitely inspires me if I know what that is.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so the first thing he established now is that we need to have the seichel of the nefesh elokis, of the divine soul, has to also be understood by the natural intelligence of the seichel hativi, sheyoven eseinyan. Now he's going to explain, okay, that's meichin. What about the midas? So he says now, ve'im tia haveda rak b'meichin, we need also that it should affect the emotions. If the Aveda will only be in the intellectual level, cognitively, hainu basoga lekus, basoga salakus, in comprehending godliness, ubispailush sichle. And yes, an excitement, but the excitement is an intellectual one. V'lo yirba nefesh alikis, hispailush amidus belev, and the divine soul will not have an excitement or stimulation or arousal of the emotions in the heart. Lo yiful gamkin alamidas the nefesh habamis. That too won't have an impact on the emotions of the animal soul. So the first thing you need is should have an impact on the seichel. Now he's saying that you also need that the seichel should come into midas, because if it doesn't, midas of the nefesh alakis, then it also won't have an impact on the nefesh habamis. So there's two ways that the impact will be lacking. One is if the natural seichel or the animal soul does not understand the idea. Number two, if the nefesh elokis does not get aroused with feelings, if it just remains in intellectual domain, it won't affect the nefesh, the midas nefesh. Gami masiga in b'seichel hativi gamke. Even if he would understand it, even if the first condition was met, that the seichel hativi, the natural intelligence, does understand. Even then, if there are no midas in the nefesh elokis is not aroused emotionally, that also won't impact the midas of the nefesh habamis, even if the nefesh TV, the seichel TV, understands the idea. And we need both. We need the seichel of the nefesh elokis should be understood by the seichel TV, the natural human intelligence, and we need the nefesh elokis should be aroused with an emotion to be able to impact the emotions of the animal soul. And I believe I'll stop here. So we need both. So this is, as I said, pretty elaborate, relatively speaking, especially for volume 3, pretty elaborate game plan, like literally a playbook, if you wish, of how the nefesh elokis and nefesh habamis, how the nefesh elokis engages with the animal soul in trying to affect it. And so it gives you something to work toward, wherever you may be, whatever level you're at. This is definitely some, these are the tools and the methods. So we'll stop here before the parentheses, which I see is not such a short one. And then he's going to go back to Shemin, I see. Okay, good. Any other questions? Yeah.
He's going to go into it further, I assume, but by having the midos of the nefesh elokis active, engaged, it should have be must be on the midos of the nefesh behema. is that the Indian of like, have to Hashem when you're feeling this deep love and awe for God in your nefesh elokis, that it should influence those midot in the nefesh behema. Is that essentially what he's saying? So that
he said it before. I wouldn't say all three. The expression b'chol levavcha. Why does it say levavcha with two bases? B'shnei yitzarecha.
I see. Okay, just that level.
The Yetzer and the Yetzer, the nefesh elokis and nefesh habamis. So he did discuss it earlier, and that's what he is. He is right now discussing how, but here is mostly discussion is how the nefesh elokis has to behave in order to have impact on nefesh habamis. He's not talking so much about the nefesh habamis, what happens to it afterwards, its contribution and so on. We'll get to that as well, but in the language of Torah of the Alter Rebbe. When he calls Ner Hashem Nishma, he says it's the avodah of the nefesh elokis atzma, as it affects the animal soul. Then there's going to be deeper levels of impact. We're going to have to discuss that more at length, and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer also is very relevant to that. Okay. Yeah, b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha he brought before a number of times. Yeah. Okay. We stop here, a little down, more than way down the page, 1465, before the parentheses, the line imasige inyan. Tzarich li shneim dafka.
I had one more quick question for you, Rabbi. As you mentioned, this is Ayin Beis, the Rebbe is laying out a playbook, as the term you used, which I thought was very apropos name. How would you say this playbook, as far as Avodas Hashem, is coming down into Avodah, differs? Does it differ dramatically? Is it supplementary? Is it with the playbook of Tanya, which is known as which is the playbook
that's a general question of Chassidus in general. Even the Alter Rebbe himself, in addition to Tanya, said many Maimarim. So there's different ways it's explained. Sometimes it says that Tanya is the Torah Shebiksav of Chassidus, the written Torah, and the rest of Chassidus is Torah Shebal Peh. So it would be like difference in Chumash and Gemara. So even though Chumash has all the basics in it, but how much can you understand without the Gemara? That's one way it's explained. Others say, and not a contradiction, others say Tanya is especially first volume, meaning the first section rather. Tanya, Likutei Amorim, the 53 chapters, that it's Likutei Eitzos. It's really not the doctrine of Chassidus as much as the advice of Chassidus. So Tanya then would be, even though there's a lot of depth there and there's learning and there's plenty, but the Alter Rebbe is not laying out the building blocks of Seder Shtalshlus in Tanya, even though we can derive a lot from it, but he doesn't begin with that. He doesn't say, okay, let's start from Atzmus, and then we go to Eir Ein Sof, Lifnei Tzimtzum. He brings these themes in there, but it's all in the language of advice, essentially to how to be a Beinani, how to have self-mastery, self-control. Whereas Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus and the rest of the Rabbeim, what they did was also lay out the whole Seder Shtalshlus. So I don't think it's a contradiction. Everything here that you learn here is complements and helps understand Tanya and needs Tanya as well. Like here, the Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Habamis. So in Tanya, there are pieces in Tanya that parallel and somewhat reflect the things we're learning here. But this is definitely much more elaborate and also much more, more applicable in a way. No, that's not the right word, not applicable. It's more tools. You have more tools here in how the Nefesh Elokis affect the Nefesh Habamis. In Tanya, he speaks about it. I'm teaching now chapter 14, what you should say to your heart in order that the Nefesh Habamis shouldn't affect you. So I see it more. I mean, for myself, I look at it as one big picture, just like you look at any part of Torah. You look at Torah as one big picture, starting from Chumash, Torah Shebiksav, Torah Shebal Peh, Kabbalah, the Gemara, Talmud, all the Rashenim, Achreinim, all the way till today. And if you could see the big picture, they each one, same thing in Chassidus. I think it's all part of a bigger picture. I mean, you can learn Tanya and be interesting how different people experience it. Some people Tanya is enough for them. For me, I need this. Definitely adds a whole other dimension. Things of interface. Tanya, for example, that concept of interface, you don't really hear that. Even though once you learn Ayin Beis, you go back and realize that's also the Tanya's interfacing between God and existence. It's not quite in the same with all the building blocks and the dynamics of it. These are just quick thoughts on the matter. I didn't develop this into a whole doctrine, just more of a.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So we're stopping here by the parentheses, but it's a good question, something good to bring about the difference between the Tanya and the rest of Chassidus.